I never thought betrayal would taste like champagne. The bubbles were still fizzing in my glass when my sister threw the first punch, not with her fists, but with her words. We were standing in the marble-floored dining room of Giordano's, the kind of Italian place where the bread comes warm and the judgment comes cold. 70 people had gathered to celebrate Chloe's engagement, and the air hummed with that particular energy of forced family joy. I'd arrived early, like always, straightened the name cards when they looked crooked, smiled at distant aunts who couldn't quite remember what I did for a living, wore the navy dress that made me invisible enough to avoid questions, but present enough to avoid concern. Then Chloe arrived, and the room reorganized itself around her like she was the sun. She had that effect on people, always had. Tall, golden-haired, with a laugh that could fill a cathedral. The engagement ring on her finger caught every light in the room, a 2-carat promise that sparkled like her future. Her fiancé, Blake, followed a half-step behind, shaking hands with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I was talking to Aunt Diane about her garden, something safe, something boring, when Chloe's voice cut across the room. "Oh, Danielle's here," she announced, like I'd just materialized. "Everyone, my baby sister. She works at the courthouse downtown." A few polite nods. Someone asked if I liked it. I smiled the smile I'd perfected over 3 years, the one that said yes without inviting follow-up questions. Then Chloe added the kicker. "She's just admin, you know. Answers phones, files paperwork." She said it with that careless affection people use when they think they're being kind. Not all of us can close million-dollar deals like Blake here. The laughter was polite. Sympathetic, even. Like I was a puppy who'd tried very hard, but hadn't quite figured out how to fetch. I felt my jaw tighten. My grandmother, seated near the window, caught my eye. She didn't say anything, just watched, the way she always did. Like she was waiting for something. I took a breath and let it go. Not because I forgave it, but because I'd learned that correcting Chloe was like arguing with a hurricane. Exhausting and pointless. Dinner began. The room filled with the symphony of silverware and small talk. I found myself seated between my father, who was deep in conversation about golf, and Blake's younger brother, Todd, who spent most of the meal on his phone. Across from me sat Blake. He'd been quiet through most of the evening, observing more than participating. Every so often, his eyes would drift in my direction, not in a flirtatious way, but in that unsettling way that meant he was thinking. Calculating. Trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know existed. Then, just as dessert arrived, tiramisu, dusted with cocoa, he leaned forward. "So, Danielle," he said, loud enough that conversations nearby began to fade. "What do you actually do?" The table quieted. Not all at once, but in that cascading way where one person stops talking, then another, until the silence becomes its own presence. Chloe laughed nervously. "We already covered this, babe. She's administration." Blake didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "At the courthouse," he pressed. "Doing what, exactly?" I could have deflected. Could have smiled and redirected and let the moment pass like I'd done 100 times before. But something about the way he asked, like he genuinely wanted to know, like my answer mattered, made me pause. I set down my fork, looked him dead in the eye, and said one word. "Judge." The room didn't explode. It fractured. Let me take you back, because this didn't start at an engagement dinner. It started 4 years ago, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken promises. I was 28 when I was appointed. The youngest municipal court judge in the county's history, a fact that made headlines for exactly one news cycle before everyone moved on to the next shiny thing. My parents had been proud, I think. There were photos, a small party, congratulations cards that used words like trailblazer and accomplished. But pride, I learned, has a shelf life. Especially when it comes to Chloe. She was 30 then, 3 years into her career in commercial real estate. She'd just closed her first major deal, a shopping complex on the north side, and the celebration had lasted weeks. Every family dinner became a referendum on her success. Every conversation circled back to her next big project, her growing client list, her name appearing in the business section of the Tribune. I didn't mind. Not at first. But then something shifted. Slowly, like a door closing 1 inch at a time until you don't notice you're locked out. When I mentioned a particularly difficult case, a custody battle that had kept me up for 3 nights, my mother changed the subject to Chloe's new listing. When I tried to explain why I'd ruled a certain way in a landlord dispute, my father's eyes glazed over. "Sounds complicated," he'd say, then ask Chloe about her commission structure. At Thanksgiving that year, I made the mistake of correcting someone who asked if I was a court clerk. "Actually, I'm a judge," I'd said, trying to keep my voice light. Chloe had laughed. "Don't make it sound so fancy. It's just traffic court." It wasn't. I presided over small claims, housing disputes, preliminary hearings, real cases, real stakes, real people whose lives hung on my decisions. But the correction died in my throat because everyone was already nodding along with Chloe's version. Simpler. Less threatening. That's when I realized they didn't want me to be a judge. They wanted me to be less complicated, less accomplished, less likely to shift the careful balance of attention in our family. Because as long as I stayed small, Chloe could stay big. So I stopped explaining. When people asked what I did, I said, "I work at the courthouse." When they assumed admin, I let them. When Chloe made jokes about me pushing papers, I smiled. It wasn't kindness. It was surrender. My grandmother was the only one who pushed back. "You're hiding," she told me once, after a particularly painful Christmas dinner where Chloe had spent 40 minutes describing her promotion and no one had asked about my caseload. "I'm keeping the peace," I'd replied. She'd looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. Peace for who? I didn't have an answer. The courthouse became my sanctuary. There, I wasn't Chloe's little sister. I wasn't just anything. I was Judge Foster, measured, fair, respected. People stood when I entered the room. They called me Your Honor. They listened when I spoke. It was intoxicating. And isolating. Because every night, I'd drive home to an apartment where I practiced invisibility, then show up to family dinners where I pretended my job was clerical work. I told myself it was temporary. That eventually, they'd ask. That eventually, they'd see. But eventually never came. Until Blake asked his question. Until I answered. Until everything I'd buried came rising to the surface in a single, devastating word. Judge. The word hung in the air like smoke. Chloe's laugh came first. High, nervous, disbelieving. "Oh my God, stop." But Blake wasn't laughing. His expression had shifted from curiosity to recognition, and I watched it happen in real time. The narrowing of his eyes, the slight lean forward, the way his mouth opened and closed as he searched his memory. "Wait," he said slowly. "Judge Foster. Danielle Foster." My father's fork clattered against his plate. Blake turned to Chloe, then back to me. "You presided over the Hartman case. Last spring. The commercial lease dispute." I nodded once. "My firm represented the property owner," he continued, his voice gaining certainty. "You ruled against us. Said we hadn't provided adequate evidence of lease violations." He paused. "You were right." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, suffocating, filled with the weight of 4 years of carefully constructed lies, not mine, but theirs. The lies they'd told themselves about who I was. The lies I'd let them believe because it was easier than fighting. My mother's face had gone pale. "Danielle, you're a judge." "For 3 years," I said calmly. "But you never." She stopped, confusion giving way to something worse. Realization. "I did tell you," I said. "The day I was appointed. You congratulated me. There were cards. We had dinner at Fleming's." I watched her face as the memory surfaced, unwelcome and undeniable. My father cleared his throat. "Well, we thought. I mean, you always said you worked at the courthouse," and when Chloe mentioned admin. "I never mentioned admin," I interrupted quietly. "Chloe did." And I stopped correcting her. All eyes turned to my sister. Chloe's face had gone from pale to flushed, red creeping up her neck. "You let us believe that," she said, her voice sharp. "You let everyone think." "I let you." The words came out harder than I intended. "Chloe, you insisted. Every time I tried to talk about my work, You redirected. Every time someone asked, you answered for me. I learned to shut up because it was the only way to make it through a family dinner without being interrupted. That's not. She looked around the table for support, but no one moved. Mom, she's making me sound like. Like what? I asked. Like someone who couldn't stand the idea of her little sister being successful. The room was silent enough to hear breathing now. Blake was staring at Chloe like he'd never seen her before. My grandmother had a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips. Aunt Diane looked mortified. Todd had finally put down his phone. Chloe stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is my engagement dinner, she said, her voice trembling. You're doing this now? Making it about you. I answered a question, I said evenly. You're the one who made it something else. Blake. She turned to her fiancé, desperation creeping in. Tell her she's being ridiculous. But Blake was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. The way you've talked about your sister tonight. The way you've talked about her in general. He trailed off. I don't think that's okay. Chloe's mouth fell open. She mocked you, Blake continued, looking at me now. In front of 70 people. Called your career a joke. And you just sat there. Because I'm used to it, I said simply. That hit harder than anything else I could have said. I saw it register on my mother's face, on my father's, even on Chloe's, though she tried to hide it behind anger. I need air, Chloe announced, grabbing her clutch. She looked at Blake expectantly. He didn't move. Blake, she repeated. I think I'll stay, he said quietly. I'd like to hear more about Judge Foster's work. Seems like I've been dating someone who doesn't know her own sister. And that was the moment Chloe finally understood. This wasn't about me revealing a secret. It was about her realizing she'd never bothered to look. Chloe left. The room remained frozen for exactly 7 seconds, I counted, before the whispers started. Low, urgent, spreading like wildfire through the remaining guests. I could feel the stares, the reassessment happening in real time as 70 people recalibrated everything they thought they knew about Chloe's quiet little sister. My grandmother was the first to speak. About damn time, she said, loud enough to break the tension. A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. Sweetheart, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Mom, I announced it at dinner 4 years ago. You asked if the robe was dry clean only. Her face crumpled. But after that, you never. I tried, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice remained. For months, I tried. But every time I brought up a case or a ruling or anything from my work, someone changed the subject. Usually to whatever Chloe was doing. So I stopped trying. My father looked stricken. We didn't mean to. I know you didn't mean to, I interrupted gently. That's what made it worse. You didn't actively ignore me. You just forgot to remember. Blake was still watching me, his expression unreadable. How long did you let this go on? He asked. This assumption about your job. 2 years, I admitted. Maybe 3. That's a long time to stay quiet. It's a longer time to be ignored. He nodded slowly, like that made sense to him in a way it clearly didn't to anyone else at the table. Todd, Blake's younger brother, finally spoke up. Wait, so you're actually, like, a real judge? With the hammer and everything? Gavel, I corrected automatically. And yes. That's actually kind of badass. I couldn't help it, I smiled. It has its moments. Aunt Diane leaned in, her voice hushed like we were sharing secrets. So when Chloe said you answered phones. I've never answered a phone at the courthouse, I said. I have a clerk who does that for me. More whispers. More recalculation. I could see it happening. The mental adjustments, the retroactive embarrassment, the dawning understanding that they'd all been complicit in diminishing me. My mother's eyes were wet now. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Danielle, I'm so. Don't apologize, I said, And I meant it. Just see me. Going forward. That's all I want. Blake cleared his throat. I should probably go check on Chloe. But he didn't sound enthusiastic about it. She'll be fine, my grandmother said dryly. Chloe's always fine. She just doesn't like sharing the spotlight. Blake winced. I'm starting to notice that. He stood, but before leaving, he turned back to me. For what it's worth, Judge Foster, you made the right call in the Hartman case. We knew it at the time. We just didn't like losing. No one does, I said. He smiled, a real smile, sad and knowing. Then he left to find his fiancé. The dinner resumed, but it was different now. People came up to me, asked questions, apologized for assumptions they'd made. I watched my parents struggle with their guilt, watched my grandmother bask in vindication, watched the entire social architecture of our family shift beneath our feet. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. Around midnight, when most guests had left and the restaurant staff were clearing tables with pointed efficiency, my mother found me on the terrace. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, cold and beautiful. She's not coming back tonight, my mother said. I just spoke to her. She's at Blake's apartment. I didn't mean to ruin her night. You didn't ruin anything, honey. You just told the truth. She paused. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you fight harder? To make us listen? I considered the question. Because I thought if you really wanted to know, you'd ask. And when you didn't ask, I figured it meant you didn't want to know. Oh, sweetheart. My mother's voice broke. We did want to know. We got comfortable with our version of you. The easy version. I know, I said. That's why I let it happen. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the city breathe. She's not a bad person, my mother said finally. Chloe, I mean. I know that too. She's always needed to be the best at everything. And when you became a judge, I think it scared her. That's not my problem to fix, I said quietly. My mother nodded. You're right. It's not. We stayed there until the cold became unbearable, then went back inside to face whatever came next. The text messages started at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake, had been since 4, staring at my ceiling and replaying the previous night in an endless loop. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, Chloe's name, followed by a wall of text. You humiliated me. In front of everyone who matters. On MY night. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Waiting to make me look small. I stared at the messages, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear as she typed and deleted. Finally, one more came through. Blake's pulling away. I can feel it. Are you happy now? I set the phone down without responding. The truth was, I wasn't happy. I wasn't anything. I felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and removed something essential. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel, finally being seen, finally being acknowledged. It was supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like loss. My apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I made coffee I didn't drink, showered in water that never got quite warm enough, dressed in the kind of casual clothes that felt wrong for a Sunday. Like I should be doing something important but couldn't remember what. At 10:30, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my grandmother, sturdy and determined in her purple coat. You look terrible, she announced when I opened the door. Good morning to you too. She pushed past me, surveying my apartment with the critical eye of someone who'd raised 4 children and wasn't impressed by mild disorder. You haven't eaten. I can tell. You get this grey look when you don't eat. I'm fine. You're not fine. You just blew up your family's entire understanding of who you are. That's exhausting. She headed for my kitchen, opening cabinets like she owned the place. Eggs. I don't think. That wasn't a question. 20 minutes later, we sat at my small dining table, really just a desk I'd repurposed, eating scrambled eggs and toast. My grandmother had somehow made them perfect, the way she always did. Your mother called me at 7 this morning, she said between bites. Sobbing. Said she'd failed you as a parent. She didn't fail. She did, actually. So did your father. So did I, in some ways. She met my eyes. We all saw what we wanted to see. You made it easy by staying quiet, but we made it easy by not asking harder questions. I pushed eggs around my plate. I don't know what happens now. Now? Now you stop hiding. Now you stop making yourself smaller to make them comfortable. She reached across the table, her hand papery and warm over mine. You think last night was the hard part? It wasn't. The hard part comes next. What's that? Staying visible. Not apologizing for it. Not shrinking back down when they want you to. I thought about Chloe's messages. About my mother's tears. About the way my father had looked at me like I was a stranger. What if they can't handle it? Then that's their limitation, not yours. My grandmother squeezed my hand. You're a judge, Danielle. You make decisions that affect people's lives every single day. You don't get to be brave in the courtroom and small everywhere else. She was right. I hated that she was right. Chloe's going to hate me, I said quietly. Chloe doesn't hate you. She hates that she's not the only impressive one anymore. My grandmother stood, gathering plates. She'll get over it or she won't. Either way, you can't shrink yourself to save her ego. After she left, I sat in the silence of my apartment and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The anger, the hurt, the relief, the guilt, all of it. And then, slowly, something else, clarity. I pulled out my phone and typed a response to Chloe. I didn't humiliate you. I told the truth. What you do with that is up to you. I hit send before I could second guess it. The week that followed was strange. My parents called daily, apologizing in circles, asking questions they should have asked years ago. I answered patiently, repeatedly, explaining cases and rulings and the weight of the robe I wore every day. Chloe didn't call. But Blake did. I hope this isn't inappropriate, he said when I answered, his voice careful. Calling you like this. Depends on why you're calling. A pause. I wanted to apologize. For not seeing it sooner. The way she talked about you, it should have registered as wrong, but I accepted her version. Everyone did, I said. Including me, eventually. That doesn't make it right. He sighed. We're in counseling. Premarital stuff, but also, working through this. She's having a hard time. I know. She thinks you did this to hurt her. I answered a question. That's all. I know, he said. I told her that. Multiple times. Another pause. She asked me if I still want to marry her. My chest tightened. What did you say? I said I want to marry the person I thought she was. Now I have to figure out if that person exists. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. 3 weeks after the engagement dinner, Chloe finally showed up. It was a Thursday evening. I was home, still in my work clothes, the black pantsuit and white blouse that had become a kind of armor, reviewing case files for the next day. A domestic dispute that was probably going to get ugly. A kid caught tagging overpassers who needed intervention more than punishment. The knock was sharp. Insistent. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Chloe stood in the hallway looking simultaneously furious and fragile. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup. Eyes red-rimmed. This wasn't the polished, perfect version of my sister that everyone knew. This was something raw. Can I come in? She asked, though it sounded more like a demand. I stepped aside. She walked in, surveying my apartment like it was a crime scene. Lingered on the diplomas I'd hung in the hallway. Law school, the appointment certificate, a commendation from the county board. Evidence of the life she'd never bothered to learn about. Coffee? I offered. I don't want coffee. I want to know why you did this. Did what? Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't play innocent. You waited until the most important night of my life to drop that bomb. You wanted to hurt me. I stayed calm. Years on the bench had taught me how to absorb anger without absorbing it into myself. I answered Blake's question. That's all. That's all. She laughed bitterly. You destroyed everything. Blake barely looks at me now. Mom won't stop crying. Dad keeps asking why I never told him you were a judge, like it's my responsibility to know my sister's job. It is, actually. I thought I did know. You said you worked at the courthouse. And you assumed administration. You decided what that meant and never asked for clarification. Because you let me. She was shouting now. You just sat there, every family dinner, every holiday, letting me believe you were small. I finished. Less than you? Not a threat. The words hung between us like a physical thing. Chloe's face crumpled. She sank onto my couch, suddenly looking exhausted. That's not fair. Isn't it? I sat across from her. Chloe, be honest. If I'd kept correcting you, kept bringing up my cases, kept being vocal about my career, would you have been happy for me? Of course I. Would you? The silence stretched. I watched her wrestle with it, watched the truth try to surface through layers of denial. I don't know, she finally whispered. Maybe not. It was the first honest thing she'd said in years. Why? I asked gently. Because I was supposed to be the successful one. Her voice was small now. I was the ambitious one, the driven one. You were supposed to be sweet and supportive and there but not better. I'm not better. I'm just different. You're a judge, Danielle. You wear a robe. People stand when you walk in. You make decisions that change lives. She looked up at me. How is that not better? Because success isn't a competition. There's not a finite amount of it. Try telling our parents that. Try telling anyone in this family that. Someone's always the star, and someone's always not. I understood then. Finally. This wasn't about me at all. It was about Chloe's desperate need to be seen as exceptional, and her terror that someone else's light would dim her own. Blake might call off the wedding, she said suddenly. He says he needs to re-evaluate who I am as a person. Like I'm some kind of monster. Are you surprised? You spent 3 years mocking your sister in front of him. He just found out it was all a lie. It wasn't all a lie. You do work at the courthouse. Chloe. I leaned forward. Do you even know what kind of cases I hear? Do you know why I became a judge? Do you know anything about my life beyond the label you gave me? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. I didn't think so. We sat in silence. Outside, I could hear traffic, sirens, the ambient noise of a city that never quite slept. Inside, just breathing and the weight of years of unspoken truths. I don't know how to fix this, Chloe said eventually. You start by seeing me. Actually seeing me. Not the version that makes you comfortable, but the real person. What if I can't? Then we'll both know where we stand. She left 20 minutes later. No resolution, no neat ending. Just 2 sisters who'd finally said true things to each other and had no idea what came next. 6 months passed. They weren't easy months. They were the kind where you rebuild slowly, brick by careful brick, never quite sure if the foundation will hold. Chloe and Blake postponed the wedding. Not cancelled, postponed. They were still in counseling, still working through the revelation that they'd both been in love with versions of people that might not exist. Last I heard, they'd set a new date for next spring. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe they wouldn't. My relationship with Chloe had changed into something I didn't have a name for yet. We texted occasionally. Met for coffee twice. The conversations were careful, loaded with pauses where there used to be easy laughter. But they were honest. That counted for something. She came to court once. I didn't know she was there until recess. I'd been hearing a case about a tenant illegally locked out by her landlord, straightforward, but the tenant had 2 kids and nowhere to go. I'd ruled in her favor, given the landlord 48 hours to restore access and pay penalties. When I stepped down from the bench, my clerk mentioned someone was waiting. Chloe stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking uncomfortable in the fluorescent lights. She'd dressed up, professional slacks and a blazer, like she was trying to meet me on my turf. Hey, she said. Hey. I wanted to see you work. If that's weird. It's not weird. You were really good in there. She said it quietly, like an admission. The way you listened to both sides. The way you explained your ruling. I could see why Blake remembered you. Thanks. I'm sorry I never watched before. I know. We grabbed lunch at a diner 2 blocks from a courthouse. Greasy burgers and weak coffee. Nothing fancy. She asked about other cases. I asked about a property deal she was closing. We were careful with each other, like people learning a new language. Blake asked me something last week, she said as we were finishing. In therapy. Yeah? He asked if I loved you. My sister. I waited. I said of course I did. And then he asked if I liked you. She stirred her coffee. I couldn't answer. Isn't that terrible? I didn't know if I actually liked my own sister. Do you? I asked. Now? She looked at me for a long moment. I think I'm starting to. It wasn't much. But it was real. My parents made more effort. Dad started reading court reports to understand my cases. Mom asked to see my courtroom, then cried when she saw my name on the door, Judge Danielle Foster. They were trying. It was clumsy and sometimes painful, but it was something. My grandmother said it best when I visited her last month. You didn't just change how they see you. You changed how you see yourself. She was right. I'd spent years hiding not because I was ashamed, but because I was afraid. Afraid of outshining Chloe. Afraid of disrupting family dynamics. Afraid of being too much. But that night at the engagement dinner, something shifted. Not because I'd planned it, but because I'd finally reached my limit. The years of being diminished, dismissed, and defined by someone else's comfort had built to a breaking point. And when Blake asked his question, I'd had a choice: keep hiding or step into the light. I chose light. The cost was higher than I expected. Relationships fractured. Comfortable lies died. The easy version of our family, where everyone knew their role, vanished. But what grew in its place was better. Harder, messier, but better. Last week, I got a text from Chloe. I told Blake about your promotion. Municipal to circuit court. He says congratulations. So do I. And I mean it. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I called her. You told him? I said when she answered. Yeah. A pause. I'm trying to do better. To see you better. Thanks, Chloe. Don't thank me yet. I'm still working on not being jealous. At least you're honest about it. She laughed. A real laugh, not the nervous one from before. Yeah, well, therapy's expensive. Might as well get something out of it. We talked for 20 minutes. About her work, my work, whether Mom's new haircut was as bad as we thought. Normal sister things. Small things. Real things. When we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, new apartment, bigger, with windows that faced the lake, and thought about that night at Giordano's. The champagne, the marble floors, the moment everything changed. I used to think that speaking up, being seen, claiming your space meant a revolution. Explosions and drama and burning everything down. But that's not what happened. Instead, it was quieter. More like a door opening that had been closed so long everyone forgot it was there. And on the other side wasn't perfection or easy answers. Just the possibility of being known. Truly known. You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. I'd learned that the hard way. But I'd learned it. And now, every time I put on that black robe and step up to the bench, every time someone stands when I enter, every time I make a ruling that might change someone's life, I remember. This is who I am. Not who they decided I was. Not who it was convenient for me to be. Just me. Judge Danielle Foster. And once they finally see you, really see you, they can never unsee you again. That's not revenge. That's just truth. And truth, I've learned, is the quietest revolution of all.